Detection Collaborative, a detection dog training trio with Stacy Barnett.
Hi.
Robin Greubel.
Hey there.
And Crystal Wing.
What's up?
With humor and a big dose of theory, our trio talks practical training advice and features interviews with top trainers and scientists.
It's Canine Detection Collaborative.
Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Canine Detection Collaborative. I'm Robin Greubel, and I am here with one of my fabulous co-hosts, Crystal Wing.
Hello, friends.
And Stacy's lurking in the background. And we have an amazingly awesome special guest today. Denise Fenzi is joining us for a super discussion on, actually, we have like a whole host of things we want to talk to her about. And probably the first one, because I know that this is one of Crystal's favorites. Actually, I should probably let Denise introduce herself because maybe all of our listeners, even though we're very familiar with Denise, all of our listeners may not be. So Denise, would you like to give us your Here's Me intro?
I don't know. I was kind of liking your approach. Amazing. Yes. I'm like, wow.
And she wants to get right in it.
Yeah.
What else do you want to tell me? And then I'm going to record it and play it for my children. Like, do you hear this? Somebody thinks I'm amazing. Anyway,
they heard
I'm
that from me all
trainer.
summer.
I guess that's the short stories. I'm a dog trainer who started an online school, and I do train dogs for dog sports. Right now, I'm training a dog for Mondio Ring. I do compete. Don't love it, but that's part of the game. What I really love actually is helping other people with their dogs. I'm an educator. I think of myself in order as an educator above a dog trainer at this point. And education is just all things dog behavior, dog training, living with dogs. That's really what I love to do. And then my personal passion is training my own dog. So that's why I get out of bed in the morning. When people say, how do you motivate yourself to train? I find the question confusing because the least of my mental issues is not wanting to train. The problem is I love to train so much and my dog loves to train so much. So it's more, how do I get myself to stop training? So I'm one of those people. So if you're one of those people, you're like, yeah, like live, eat, breathe dogs, then we could probably sit down and have a beer and have a good time for several hours.
And so I was so fortunate this last summer that I got to do that, was to hang out. And I'm kind of like the farm junkie. I hang out at Robin's farm some summers, and then some summers I go to Denise's ranch.
It's a good deal. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. It is a lot of fun.
It was 5 days turned into 1 month or something?
Something like that.
It did. It was, I'm like, Crystal, when are you coming back? I don't know. I haven't decided yet. Okay. I know how that works.
You've been witness to that before.
I have. I've been on the receiving end and it's like, okie dokie.
Yeah. Note to others. Invite me to your farm and see how long I stay.
So Denise, how long have you been training?
Oh my gosh. So I started, my parents had dogs before me and they were doing confirmation, and my parents actually got obedience titles on Lhasa Apsos, which let me tell you is that's not a small feat. I mean, that's what happens every couple of years. Somebody manages that. And they actually got a CDX, which is a second level title on the Lhasa Apso. And that took 23 trials. So it wasn't an easy thing. And I think they qualified with a 170.5 when they finally did it. And you need a 170. And so I got my own dog for I had a couple guide dog puppies when I was 10, 11. And then I got my own dog to train when I was 13. So I started competing around there. And I'm 56. So somebody can do the math. A long time. I've been training dogs a long time.
So you kind of know your stuff then, is that what you're saying?
Well, that's a good question, because I would say I spent the first 25 years making really bad decisions. So no, that's not true. I would say when I was 25 and I got my first Belgian, I saw stuff happening around me that I found appalling. And it actually, because I'm a little bit oppositional by nature, was a big part of why I transitioned my training to a much kinder approach, because what I saw was just so hard. And I just was disturbed by that. So I would say I started trying to make good decisions when I was around 25 and started making better decisions as I had more dogs and learned more things. So I'd like to think I'm making somewhat better decisions. However, having trained my dog in a seminar for the last 3 days and watching his brain completely explode and blow out.
Oh,
So by the
no.
time we did our CGC last night, which we did do, and we did pass.
Congrats.
Thank you. He looked like a firecracker. He was so high, eyes red rimmed and just like a little devil dog, but he did the work. So that's what matters. So I don't know. Now I'm going, I don't know. Maybe I'm not such a good dog trainer. I need to get a dog trainer to help me with this. It's out of control what's going on here. But anyway.
So speaking of that, that's something I really appreciated is I feel like you're so good at breaking things down. You're generalizing like crazy and you're very creative. And that's why I feel like we kind of like bounce ideas off each other a lot. And even though this is a detection-based podcast, I mean, just even recently, there's been a lot of detection-oriented behavior problems and things that I've had. And I'm like, okay, Denise, help me out here. And so I'm thinking about your creativity a lot in your training and in your public interactions. And so I think that's kind of where I would like us to hone in today, especially. So I guess you kind of talked about your training philosophy and how that kind of shapes your approach. Do you want to share a little more about your training philosophy, or do you feel like...
Yeah. So, there's a war going on out there in the dog world, and there's those who use tools and those who don't, and those who use aversives and those who don't. And then we all argue about semantics. Like everybody uses aversives and there's no such thing as purely positive. And it's just absurdist, moronic conversation. At the point we are now, people are more interested in winning than having an intelligent conversation. So it's very hard for me to describe my training approach, philosophy, methodology in a few words because people will choose to misunderstand no matter what I say. So that means I now have to give you an entire paragraph to try to explain it. I do not use tools in training in the sense of prong collars, e-collars, choke chain. Yeah.
Okay.
I do use aversives in training. Everyone uses aversives in training. I do use intentional aversives in training. My line in the sand is I do not hurt my dogs physically. I do not cause them pain. And I do not mentally intimidate or frighten them. Now, having said that, when my dog is heading towards the counter where my dinner is cooling, and I think my dog is about to remove my dinner from the counter, I get involved. So I will absolutely move in quickly and say, you will not be eating my dinner. And that is aversive and it is a pressure technique. And I will push the dog off that counter with whatever physical presence off, like literally off, but away from the counter. So do I use aversives? I do. Are they intentional? They are. But what I won't do is hurt the dog. And that includes mental things. Like, so for example, between my two dogs, I am much more conscientious with Brito because he's a much softer dog. So there are things I simply would not do. Like if he got on the table and was eating my food, I might go, but if it didn't work, I would not come in like a bat out of hell because he's just kind of a fragile kind of guy. And I would write that one off, tell myself to train better. Zen is a much tougher dog. And I don't think I ever have mentally intimidated him. He would be very hard to mentally intimidate. So in my mind, when I think about aversives, I really do think about what dog is in front of me. And I try to balance out everyone's interests. So for example, the reason I drive my dog off my counter is because I have the right to my own dinner. And I think my dog will be just fine if I do not allow for that. So I really have a lot of awareness. I'm very conscientious of the idea that we all have rights. That includes me, it includes my dog, and it includes society. So if my dog is approaching you in a way that you find scary, and if he does not come when he is called and he's on a long line, I promise you I will not be dropping the long line so as to avoid an impact with the leash, right? So I think I'm actually a very balanced thinker. And I think I use the word fairness in a way that I wish more people would use it. To me, fairness isn't, did the dog know it, therefore he deserves the correction. For me, fairness is anyone going to be unduly harmed by allowing this behavior to continue? And I go from there. And unduly harmed doesn't even mean physically harmed. My dogs should not be scaring people. So if my dog's in the car and he barks and snarls and hits the window because someone walks by, I feel obligated to use an aversive as needed to stop that behavior, because that person doesn't know that my dog is in a crate, for example. That person has the right to walk peacefully. That's kind of where I'm at with how I train when it comes to actually teaching skills, teaching behaviors, helping other people. There's so much to do around teaching dogs what I want that's really where the vast majority of the focus comes, just by nature of what I'm trying to do. And yeah, sometimes things happen that I don't like or I want to put a stop to, but in a formal training situation, those tend to be exceptionally minor corrections. So along the lines of, I don't think so, is about usually as severe as it gets, because I focus so much on what I want. I think the distinction for me is life is not the same as formal competition training, just because formal competition training is 20 minutes a day and I structure it around my dog's well-being. And life is 24 hours a day because my dogs are pets. They're just in my house being dogs. And I think those are different things. And so dog training, formal training, is all about my dog, all about making them successful, all around their confidence. And life is about balancing everyone's needs to get along in a way that works for all the stakeholders. So that is why I cannot tell you in 10 seconds what my training approach is, because I think it's really complicated. I think it should be complicated. I think if it's not complicated for you, if you're listening to this and it's not complicated, then I think it'd be maybe worth reflecting on that, because I think it should be complicated.
So I want to talk about complicated with dog training too. You're really famous for breaking down complicated and complex behaviors and putting into digestible pieces. Can you talk about how you approach that process?
Yeah. So when I talk about foundation skills, I'm talking about 1,000 different things that I can put together in different combinations to create what I want. So like a retrieve is a sit maybe, or a down, whatever. A stay under distraction because I'm going to throw an object. It includes picking up an object. It includes sitting in front of me. It includes holding an object, maybe quietly, depending on what I'm trying to accomplish. It includes letting go of the object. It includes probably a lot more pieces, but let's just say whatever that was, 6 or 7. And when I am training my puppy up to, let's say, 6, 8, 9 months of age, I'm working on how to sit. I'm working on how to stay under distraction. I'm working on picking things up. I'm working on quiet holds. And in my mind, I'm aware that someday this is going to be a retrieve. But if you're watching, it wouldn't look the way you might think. So it could be Denise sits in a chair with her dog sitting in front, feeding cookies. Denise throws cookies away and the dog comes and finds and sits in front. Denise hands the dog something to hold, takes it away. Then Denise stands up, drops the object, walks off, and works on tug. And then eventually I might work on all those things, probably won't in a session. Maybe I'll start working on heel position, sitting there. Maybe I'll work on go between my legs. And I think if a person was watching, they really wouldn't know what sport I was training for, because the pieces are so all over the map. And then eventually they start being strung together. So the first time I do a formal retrieve, the dog knows sit, the dog knows stay, the dog understands distraction, the dog knows how to pick something up. Hopefully, if I've done a good job, even the early attempts are, well, they're always going to be somewhat messy. They're not that messy because the dog has pieces. And I really like training that way. One, it means I can go into a lot of different sports easily. I can just change direction based on what I emphasize. I think it's really easy on the dog's brain to learn that way because you're isolating a variable and teaching it. So they're really learning one thing. I think it makes it much harder for dogs to anticipate because they don't even necessarily know what the final exercise is. They don't need to know it. They just need to follow whatever cue and pattern I gave them at that time. And so you end up with a dog who has a lot of words. I don't know how many words my dog has, but he has a lot of words. And now we put those words into patterns. And the nice thing about training that way is if somewhere along the line you don't like what you saw, it's pretty easy to fix it. So I worked with a new decoy the other day. I was working on Mondio, and this is a French ring decoy he's not familiar with me or my training or my dog. The problem is when my dog was sitting and barking in front, and then there's a cue, you say decoy step out, the person walks forward and the dog should go into a guarding position and my dog guards from behind. Well, my dog does not know the word decoy step out. So there's lots of ways you could teach that. You could say decoy step out, and you could hand the decoy a leash, and the leash could help manipulate the dog into position. And then you could go on with whatever it is you were going to do. And that gives you one shot at it. Maybe you would repeat that whole sequence a few times, send the dog in to bark, dog barks, you say decoy step out, the decoy puts the dog where you want them, and you continue. And that's not what I did. I sent him in, and then I realized he does not know that word. He just doesn't know that word. He knows what guard means, and it's the same, but he doesn't understand decoy step out. So I told him to lie down, stay. I asked the decoy to turn and face my dog. And I said to him, decoy step out, guard. He knows what guard is. So he just did it. And then I told the decoy, give him a bite. And then I stopped and I put my dog on a down. And I told the decoy, turn around and face my dog. So in a matter of 1 minute, we were able to have 5 or 6 repetitions of this simple piece, pulled away from barking, pulled away from escort. And by the last one, when I said it, my dog whipped around and did it correctly. And then the next time I worked with my dog, when I said decoy step out, he just whipped around into position. So it made it very easy for him to understand something has happened and we're now drilling a thing. Why are we drilling a thing? There's something she wants me to learn. And so he picked that up very easily. Now, it was interesting because the decoy I worked with said, oh, that's really interesting what you did. That's very smart, because the dog only had one thing to think about. And that made it really clear. I really like what you did there. So that worked really well, because if a human decoy can understand what you're trying to do, the dog probably can as well. There are occasions when I've watched training where I actually could not figure out what the person was trying to teach the dog. I would say that does not bode well for your training. So if another human who is a dog trainer is watching what you're doing, and it could be detection work, because really training is training. So if I'm watching a detection trainer train something and there's something they don't like, I should be able to figure out what they don't like without knowing anything about the sport or what it should look like, simply by watching their reaction. So if I can see something happened there and then suddenly something changed and there was a change and something got emphasized, and I could watch the one variable that was getting the yes and the reinforcement, and I see it 3 or 4 times, I should be able to look at that picture and say, oh, the dog looked back at the handler isolated that piece, put something on the ground. The dog did not look back. Yes, reward. They put something on the ground. The dog did not look back. Yes, reward. They did that 4 times. So they must have been teaching the dog not to look back. So then it's obvious, right? And I think that's a really good test. And I think it's good for people to watch training from disciplines that are not their own. And if they can't understand them, at the very least, have some sympathy for the poor dog who is supposed to be figuring it out, who also does not understand. So good training, in my opinion, kind of crosses sports. It's a bit irrelevant what you're doing. The techniques you choose will vary, but the isolating a variable, breaking it down, and helping the dog with several, 3, 4, 5 in a row setups to almost ensure correct behavior. And if you don't get it, and if I, as a bystander, was watching and I still don't know what you're doing after 5 reps, what I would love to see the trainer do is say, I need to stop now because I'm not communicating clearly, and I need some time to think about why I'm not able to make this clear to my dog. If I cannot, in 5 repetitions, isolate a variable down and get it where I want it, I do need to stop. That doesn't mean the next time will be successful. I can think of something in my head now I have been working on for months, and I still have not adequately communicated. It's getting better, but I've not adequately communicated it to my dog. But what that tells me is, don't do the same thing again and again and again. And there's been a lot of variation. Isolate that variable. It looks good. Now put it back in a chain. It doesn't look good. What have I done wrong? What have I done wrong? And I find that crosses all sports and just creates a dog who, when they do pull the pieces together, is very confident and very clear, because they go from behavior to behavior to behavior, and it becomes very seamless and very correct.
I love this just because I am always talking to people about slicing things down into little thinner slices. And I was just putting together a presentation for one of my webinars and actually have a pictures of Flash, who is my little Labrador, with like 8 different pictures of all of these different things in her mouth for a hold. And it's everything from a ragu jar to a fly swatter to a back massager. and having all of those little tiny pieces that you can be like, okay. And what's really fun about that is working with some of the other trainers that I work with, especially for the bird dog stuff. I can let other pieces in my chain get sloppy if I'm working on this one piece because I want to clean this piece up, but the dog will understand the criteria once you put the whole chain together. So I love that.
I think that's where my question comes in is, how do you know when a behavior is ready to move from micro steps to the full integration into your training?
I'm probably more aggressive than most. And I don't know if that's good or bad. And it's partly a reflection to watching people around me who move too slowly. I see a lot of folks who do a lot of really good foundation training and they never seem to go anywhere with it. They sort of spin. And if anything, I err on the other side. So the first 6 months is just a free for all of having a good time teaching a billion things. I'm super high rate of reinforcement. It's a big party. But once I start stringing stuff together, I tend to move very fast, faster, I would say, than most. And that's kind of an exciting time to watch the pieces come together. You will find that when you pull things together, it's not quite so perfect as 10 puzzle pieces creates a behavior. I wish it was, because there is a little bit more to it. And then pulling it together is where you kind of realize you're going to have to do a little bit of smoothing out. But I like to do it because it entertains me. And probably it's a weakness of my own. Again, I can think about training I'm doing now where I wish I had done my foundation pieces in a more solid fashion. Because I'm doing a new sport, to me, I don't have the history of failure that drives good decision making. So with prior dogs, yeah, believe me, I put a lot of time into my healing because I know what happens if you don't. Because I've had some, negative experiences. Whereas now, like I'm teaching my object guard and I'm kicking myself for not doing a much better job on return to the object, no matter what it is, no matter what. And I thought it was good enough. And now I realize that behavior needs to be more than good enough. It has to be as good as all of my healing behaviors. But I don't have the history and the experience in the sport to necessarily recognize that when a decoy comes in and tries to pull my dog off that object, their mental model for return has to be super, super strong. And that's where sport-specific stuff does matter because you are aware of where dogs are going to really struggle. So I can see where now I kind of am kicking myself. But, it's not like it's over. It just means that I have to do it now. And that's a little bit frustrating. And you kind of wake up a little sad because you can't do the fun, flashy stuff that you thought you were going to do. But when you stop and you go, okay, I got to clean that up again, and you put it back, it's pretty gratifying when you see improvement in that area.
And it's interesting because you talk about that. And it's one of the things I talk to students about is the fact that as a trainer, and especially in a sport that you're familiar with or a discipline you're familiar with, you can look at a behavior and be like, oh, I know what that behavior turns into 2 weeks from now. So we're going to stop it here. But when you play at a new thing, you don't know those sand traps.
And that is where having people around you who are experienced in the specific sport, even if they don't train like you, doesn't actually matter because they can still look at something and say, hey, I just want to give you a heads up. Okay, I'll give you an example. I don't have access to decoys very often at all. Several times a year, that's it. So that means I train a lot on my own. That means I teach things in ways that I really don't want to, but I don't have a choice. So for example, there's an exercise where your dog will search for a decoy and bark at them. Well, I don't have a lot of access to decoys, so I can't get in the repetitions, and my dog is struggling with this exercise. So what I started doing was hiding the suit, not the decoy, and teaching my dog to search for the suit, bark at the suit. So somebody asked me about that. Actually, a judge a week ago said, are you concerned that when you get to a trial, because there are empty suits on the field, that your dog might go up and bark at a suit? And I said, yes, actually, I am concerned about that. But I'm weighing it out. I'm saying, what are my parameters? What are my circumstances? What is the potential offside? And I said to the person, I said, but what I'm trying to do to help with that, the only time I have him search for a suit is when he and I are alone. If there are any other people around, it's always a person. And this weekend I was in a seminar and I had suits laying around on purpose. I even had them propped up like little people. And not once did he even look at a suit. He was looking for a person. So I think I'm going to be okay. But it's super helpful to have somebody ask me about it because maybe I wouldn't have thought of it. And I will say that if I did this again, what I would have done instead is picked a special toy. And the only thing that's his hiding toy. And that's your searching toy. And it goes everywhere. And that searching toy is not going to ever be on a trial field. So I can see how again, the next dog kind of a thing, right? I could have made better decisions going forward. So when you have people around you, whether they train like you or not, whether they're even local to you, they will see little things like that you might miss because you might not know that there could be empty suits on a field. So it's always helpful to have folks around who can kind of spot that sort of, that might cause you some problems. You might keep doing it, but what can you do to mitigate the damage?
We kind of talked about that too as creative problem solving, where I was having a problem with getting Checkmate to be consistently barking in the Holden bark. And then it was like, wait a minute, detection wise, we have Holden bark for odor. And so what if I have an odor that's in the blind where he's going to be barking and I put the odor there? And so I can get the reps of him going and barking in the blind using detection as one of the creative kind of problem solving solutions for that. So it's been fun to kind of bounce those kind of ideas with you because having the protection side, but also the detection side, it's been a cool combo.
And, frankly, it probably makes your dog stronger in both sport because you're getting in repetitions for your odor as well. So you're doing two different things and the dog is generalizing the behavior. Find the thing, no matter what kind of a field you're on, whatever you're doing. And the more ways you generalize a behavior, the better the dog gets at those behaviors.
Okay. So speaking of generalization, you're known for getting behaviors to generalize across all these contexts. So what strategies are you using to make it happen?
Well, I enjoy doing it. So I just kind of have a what happens if sort of mindset. And I find it entertaining to do weird stuff. I look at the world as a doggy playground. So my dog is struggling to back up, goes 3 steps, sits, downs, whatever. So I'm going to have you back over my couch a few times. Now that's hugely entertaining for everyone. Me, the dog, the internet, because I'll probably record that. And I get my dog backing over the couch. And then I realize he can actually literally back up and over the backside. Oh, that's fun. Now, can I ask him to lie down on the far side so he can't see me? And actually, he could do that. And then when I asked him to back on the flat, he was going 10, 15 feet. So out of nowhere, now all of a sudden, because I took it out of the pattern, he's doing it so much better. I find that super, super motivating. And because I know how important it is and I don't pattern train, I do exceptionally little pattern training. I don't have any other way to do it. Since I don't just go out there and run through the same thing, well, it's a 10-minute obedience routine. I know people who literally set up whatever competition they're in. Let's say they're doing obedience in AKC and that the class is utility and there are 2 jumps in the class. There are 7 articles. They literally every single time do a start to finish. They do every exercise, all the healing, all the halts. They do the stand for exam. They do it exactly the way they would in the ring. And when I say something like, well, I don't have a second jump, we could just use the log that's over there. They're kind of appalled, intrigued, like, what? But see, jump is jump. I don't know why you have to have a high jump on one side, a broad jump on the other side, 40 feet apart at that, and they measure it. And you can do it that way. You can train that way. It would bore me beyond reason. I don't think I could stick around because because frankly, what you're probably going to get in today's training session is a lot like what you got yesterday. I don't find that very interesting. So for me, generalizing is it's fun. It's like being a kid out dog. I wonder what will happen if I ask him to, and sometimes you'll get something that looks good. And sometimes you'll get something that makes you say, yeah, that's not going to work for me.
I got work to do.
Yeah. And I really like working sports. So it doesn't matter to me. A working sport to me is something that is kind of hardwired into the dog. So a Labrador, the working sport would be to hunt. A Terrier, the working sport would be like barn hunt. I really like watching dogs do things that are kind of hardwired in. And then my job isn't really to put go in the dog. The go is innate. The dog goes. My job is to put stop in the dog. And I like to put stop in the dog in a way that the dog is not offended by the stop. And the way to do that is to break the patterns, because then the dog has to listen. So the bird got shot out of the sky, dropped on the ground. What's next? If you're a pattern trainer, the next thing is you send. If you're not a pattern trainer, the next thing could be healing. It could be you could be saying sit down, set up in heel position, take an object. You have so many choices. If the dog doesn't know what you're going to do, they must listen. There's no way around it. And I like to do it to the point that people who are watching are literally caught by surprise. If I can catch a bystander who knows about dog training by surprise, I catch my dog by surprise. If you do that all the time, then listening becomes the default. The dog does not know what's going to happen. And so they, out of habit, they listen and they're not inclined to break and do whatever mischief. With the dogs that are lower drive, I don't do a lot of that because with those dogs, I want them a little bit more in their own head, pushing, driving forward because patterns give confidence and unpredictable gives listening. And so I tend to do both depending on the temperament of the dog. If I want to build a dog, I'll do more patterns.
No, I totally agree with you on the patterns thing because it goes back to all of those little individual pieces. We had an ice storm. I was doing all sorts of weird things in the building and figuring out creative ways to teach the dogs that they have to pay attention to me after I have thrown their really short marks, which they have no problem seeing, but we're going to do something weird. They're like, this is a funny game. Usually we just go get the thing. And I'm like, no more just going to get the thing.
And then they listen. And I mean, I think you can also, depending on the temperament of the dog, it actually, in some dogs, actually builds up intensity and drive because when they do get sent, they were thinking and concentrating, and now it's a release. Like I did all the things, and now I get to run, and you get a really explosive response. Now, with some other dogs, it does the opposite. You throw the object, you put them through 5, 6 alternatives. By the time you send them, they never had a lot of interest in retrieving anyway. So the only thing that makes them love it is watching it go, right? And now it's a dead thing.
Right.
That's why you need to kind of know your dog and your trainer when you work with people. What worked for the last dog, I understand it worked for the last dog, but this is not the last dog. So trying to ask yourself, this dog, does it bottle up excitement or does it bleed it off and drain it to nothing? Some dogs you put them on a sit, stare, down, stay. 5 minutes later, they're nice and calm and quiet. And other dogs are just literally fried. They worked so hard to stay there. They're crazy. And so I personally like to have dogs that are very high in drive. I personally like to work dogs on the edge of control. Some people don't like that at all. They want more mellow. It's not right or wrong. I think it's just opinion, preference. I do like to work dogs that are pretty close to the edge. I think it's entertaining. Makes me think hard.
The trainer challenge option. I so get you on that one. And it's been interesting for me to have I have mom, I have dad who are very distinct. And then I have the daughter and to see which traits come through. And it's one of those things where it's fun to be able to look at Flash and go, oh, you're going to be your mother. I got it.
Fascinates. I could talk about genetics for an hour. Here, I'll just tell you any story. So my dog's brother was at the seminar this weekend and I've never met him. I've never seen him. The number of times he could have been my dog on the field, like literally looks the same mannerism, same tone to his voice, some distinct differences. Like I asked the decoy, how are they different? And don't take this wrong. He meant it nicely. He said, the brother cares what she thinks and your dog does not. What he meant, he doesn't mean that Zen doesn't care what I think, but her dog actually really likes to play with her, right? Is just as happy to come back and play with her and is all light and happy and cheerful as her dog is to go work the decoy. The dog has a lot of balance. It's actually a very, very good dog, very balanced. Zen lacks for balance. Zen just wants to have an argument. He just wants to fight. He just wants to take the decoy down. He just wants to win. So if we're allowed to use the dominance word, which some circles I'm allowed to say that and some I'm not, the decoy says your dog is just very dominant, very possessive, and he doesn't have a sense of humor about this. He just means it. And that makes control hard with him. Beside that element that her dog has more play and my dog is more fight, the similarities were sort of shocking, like even their healing style. And they were trained differently. The littlest things, the way they sit, the way they lie down, the way they do it, the way they move into their behaviors. I'm like, that's amazing. And they're trained quite differently. Genetics is just endlessly fascinating world for me.
Fascinating. Yeah.
So I've been thinking a lot. I've got so many things I've written down. You should see my notebook here. I'm trying to tie a couple things together I can make it kind of flow with what we were just saying, but it's not gonna. So whatever, I'm going to give up on it. The working on edge thing, I'm going back to another thing is when a sport is new to you, And then also that people don't move fast enough, but then also knowing that we kind of have Malinois brains. I'm kind of putting all of that together and trying to put it into question. And we talked about like there's the foundations and you hit plateaus. So I was talking to my good friend Nancy, and we were talking about why it seems like a lot of trainers, especially in our camp or whatever you want to say, tend to just stay too long in the beginning at that foundation. And I think you really hit on a lot of that of you kind of don't know what to train unless you have the people around you that can show you or tell you what's going to go right or wrong from what you're doing. But then also it's scary to work on edge at that arousal, that control piece, when you also don't know how to handle errors. You don't know how to handle what ifs and the I wonders. And so I think that's where it takes you back to your creativity side, but also you have a plan for your what ifs and the I wonders. I don't know where this is going. I don't know if you can riff on that or not.
There's so much in there.
It's so much. You've been hurting my brain.
I'm thinking about, so drive and arousal are not the same thing. I assume you've talked about that on this podcast. People who listen probably have a clue. So drive is sort of the genetic need, desire to do the thing. Arousal is the fuel that pushes it up. You have to have enough arousal or you don't have drive. I love working dogs that are in drive at the edge, because when it's in drive, it's a clear head and it's very focused. That means I can control it. When the arousal is more than the dog needs for the behavior in front of you, that gets to be a lot less fun, because now what you're actually dealing is an emotional state, which is separate from the dog's drive. It's probably not fun for the dog. So it's like fuel is good, but if the dog's on fire, that's not fun. He needs enough fuel to be hot and ready and clear. So I think it's kind of important for people to know the difference, because when I say I want to work on the edge, I don't mean the edge of arousal. I mean the edge of drive. I don't want my dog uncomfortable. And I think when dogs are very high in arousal, and my dog, he's kind of written the book around that right now. He's super, super high in certain circumstances because they're so patterned around fight sports. That's not fun for him. That's not fun for me. But what is fun is when he is just so coiled and sprung and it's all in drive and it's focused and it's controlled. That's super cool. I think as a rule, if I just had to throw out generalities, which always get me in trouble, but I'll do it anyway. The balanced community moves way too fast and the positive reinforcement community moves way too slow. So the balanced community strings a bunch of stuff together and then they just try to fix it as they go along to, varying degrees of success. Some are quite good at it, but often will just sort of, just move. And they create patterns fast. And those patterns often have holes, and then they're hard to fix the holes because they don't have a way to just, like if you taught your retrieve by throwing objects and it was just a game and the dog brings it back, now you don't like the hold. That's actually kind of complicated, because when your dog sees the object, they're thinking run, chase, all these other things. It's hard to now isolate just the hold. The problem I'm seeing over on the positive reinforcement side, they're pretty good at putting the pieces together, but when they try to string things together and the first few times it's messy, rather than accepting the messy and working it in the chain, they try to go back to individual behaviors. And the thing that people are missing is that while it is true that a behavior chain is simply a bunch of behaviors strung together, the point that each behavior blends into the other behavior is part of the behavior chain that has to be taught in the chain. There's no way you can teach that piece out of the chain. And so you have to get comfortable with degrees of messiness. The trick is figuring out, is the problem I'm running into the dog's ability to string those pieces together, or is the problem in the actual behavior itself? Is the problem the hold? Is the problem the pickup? Or is the problem when the dog picks up and turns to hold, they munch? That piece can only be solved in the chain, because it's not the hold, it's not the pickup. It's the pickup to the hold. And I don't think a lot of positive reinforcement folks are comfortable with the fact that that piece got ugly, and they're going to have to support the dog through that piece into the hold and accept it. And it's okay. You might even for a week have a retrieve that has some really kind of little cranky bits in there that you were thinking to yourself, matching law. Oh my God, if I let this go, matching law for the rest of my life. Let that go. Stop thinking like that. Say to yourself, this is a learning piece. And don't worry about the matching law. I know your dog sucks for a week. But the thing is, even if that's 50 repetitions, over the next year of your life, you're going to get in 1,000. So it just doesn't matter. And it's also, the dog is in a fragile place and the dog knows they're learning because they are also being strung together. I think the problem with the matching law, I think in the learning phase, the dog knows that they're in their learning phase. They're uncomfortable too. When pieces are correct and strung together and the dog has that experience of correctness, I add that to the side of matching law, which is self-reinforcing, because I think dogs feel comfort in being correct. They understand correctness. They understand that you standing there quietly and letting them finish these exercises indicates that they did it correctly. If my dog does it wrong and it's a tiny thing in the learning phase, I let them finish it. I reinforce it, no problem. But as time goes by, I get involved. I don't end the exercise necessarily, but I do get involved. I might reach out, put my hand under their jaw to help support them. I need you to hold this quietly as you pick it up and bring it to front. Then they do it correctly on their own. I'm quiet. I think both of us feel good. Yes, that was correct. Take the object, reinforce the dog. So I do think there's a quality that we don't talk about a lot in terms of reinforcement, which is the smoothness of the behavior, the flow of the behavior. And I think dogs feel that correctness. And I think that is self-reinforcing. The one I'm dealing with now is my dog bark and hold. When he barks, he'd much rather bite, especially if he's feeling emotional, which he often is because he wants to bite. And yet what I notice is that when he does it correctly, something inside of me says he felt that he did it correctly. There was no quick bite nibble before he barked. He knows he's not supposed to do that. There's a little bit of disgruntledness around the decoy going, no. And he is letting go. And then he's doing the thing. There's those pieces in there that are, I think, a little bit off balance. And he knows it wasn't smooth. And then the next time he comes in and he does it right and he sits correctly and he barks and there's a smoothness and there's a feel and there's a comfort and the decoy is quiet. And I think the dog knows that. And I think that is self-reinforcing, not toys, not food. Even if I don't come in and specifically reinforce that, which is irrelevant anyway, because now the barking has happened. And now what are you reinforcing? The not biting or the barking, right? I can continue with that chain and the dog's like, this is great. We're moving forward. So I think that's an area of reinforcement that needs to be better understood. It's not going to be true for all dogs, not going to be true at all times. It's going to depend how much knowledge the dog already has about what probably is correct. But I do think it's real and it needs to be acknowledged as real. And I don't think you need to stop moving forward and run in there and say, oh my God, he did it correctly for the first time. Actually, allowing the dog to complete the behavior without you supporting the dog, holding the chin, whatever it is you do to help. I think that is reinforcing. And if you, the human, can also find the reinforcement in that, your dog did it correctly. That's really awesome. That's a satisfied form of reinforcement for the dog. And for you, you can move on now and hold that and come back around to it. And you will find that they come more often. Matching law is a real thing. So basically the idea is that whatever the dog does that works for the dog, that becomes more and more. If it happens 10% of the time, the dog will offer that behavior 10%. If it's 90%, they'll do it 90%. So of course, you want the behaviors you like to be offered as close to 100% of the time as possible. But if you think about the training called successive approximations, by definition, successive approximations means you allow the dog to get closer over time. You reward closer and closer to what you want. That's not splitting and breaking down. That's actually allowing for errors. But you're trying to move the dog over time in the correct direction. I do both. Sometimes I try to split to perfection. But eventually, I'm also going to allow for successive approximations. And especially when you're moving into chains, when you're trying to get to more finished behaviors, you have to allow for successive approximations and don't sweat the matching law. Assume that over time it works itself out. The dog wants to be correct. The dog understands the flow that comes with being correct. And that's eventually how you get yourself to trial readiness. If you take a video today and you look back 3 months and your training looks the same, that deserves some thought because your training should look dramatically different every 3 months. It really should. On some dimension, it may not be the exercise itself. It may be the demeanor of the dog. It depends what you're working on, but your training should not look the same. And if it does, it deserves a little bit of thought about, are you just so comfortable with these 20 foundation behaviors that you don't want to string them together? And people will say to me, well, I don't want to take away the platform from my position changes because I did it and the dog's foot moved. That's okay. Take the platform away anyway. And yes, the foot moved and reinforce it anyway. I don't even care. Keep the dog's confidence up. You can bring it back, but you know what? It's time to move. Maybe you should add in some backing. I don't know what you should do. But if you're a year in and you're still using a platform because the dog is incorrect when you take it away, then all you're really doing is teaching the dog that the behavior and the platform are one. You're not really teaching the behavior.
Hey, everybody, it's Stacy Barnett, and hopefully you've been enjoying Robin and Crystal interviewing Denise Fenzi. And you guessed it, our interview went really long. So we're going to break this up into 2 different episodes. You'll get to hear the end of the interview in 2 weeks with Denise in our next episode. So I hope you will tune in next time when we pick this up right where we left off. So until then, go train.
Canine Detection Collaborative.
We appreciate the time you spend with us. If you liked this episode, not only should you follow us so you don't miss the next one, but please also rate and review us in your favorite podcast app. For info on collaborating with us, go to k9detectioncollaborative.com. That's K9detectioncollaborative.com, where you can find our socials and pick up our latest monthly freebie. Join us again to talk training in the next episode.